my name is Clionadh and today let's talk about eyeshadow palettes. Specifically the ones that I love in my collection. However, I wish I could use them more often. We always have a pile of palettes like that. I mean, I just say it for myself. I know it could be a problem to a lot of people that sometimes we wish we could use our eyeshadow palette collection more often, because to be quite honest, I know a lot of us makeup lovers, we tend to accumulate more eyeshadow palettes than we can actually use up physically. I know I'm one of those people, so I don't want to shame myself, I don't want to shame those people. I just want to make this video to remind myself that yeah, you do have eyeshadow palettes in your collections already. Like every time you see something new, you find a new interesting color story, think about the one that you already have. These are the palettes that I feel like every time I open them, I feel so inspired. The color story, the texture, the formulation, just perfect. However, I don't get myself to do makeup often enough to use them, and I feel sad about that. There are some palettes in my collection that I was like, they are good, they are fine, there's nothing wrong with the formulation, nothing's wrong with the color story, but if I don't use them, I won't feel it's awful. Just something has changed. Like in the past, maybe I love them so much, my preference has changed, that's why I just don't want to use them anymore. Or it could be that they are mediocre in the beginning, and over the time I get myself to use them, but they all come unnaturally to me, so I don't feel as bad as with these palette. Let's go with the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes right now. It's the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. This is somewhat of an OG palette in my opinion, because around the time that I got this palette, it was so loved by a lot of people, and the color story at the time is so unique. I think it's still unique for Urban Decay, and we all know since the Naked palette, they haven't released interesting color stories, not anymore, not whatsoever. Recently they are really getting on the trend of the Moondash eyeshadows, specifically Space Cowboy. So they have released a bunch of palettes, a bunch of little tiny intermediate zones of products related to the shade Space Cowboy. I feel like it's just a matter of time that they release like a highlighter that's named Space Cowboy, and I wouldn't be so surprised. So I feel like this is one of the examples that Urban Decay had tried out in the past an interesting color story, and to me this palette is very colorfully neutral. So I think it's a really good representations of the traveling ideas of this palette. Like everywhere you go or every time you go on the trip, these are kind of the mood that you're gonna experience. So I think this color story is so cool, but I think the formulations is not something that I enjoy anymore, and I say it with all of the kindness and love that I have developed into a new face, that I enjoy more sheer, more light, more muted, something that's even more desaturated and cool tone than the warmth that the palette can provide. And I enjoy it. It's like mauve, rosy tones. Right now is still my absolute favorite color, and this look I created from this palette is like strange to me, and I keep looking at myself in the mirror and it was like, well, that's strange. So that's the reason why I like the formula a lot. Like so good. My boyfriend called me and forget where I was at. Anyway, this palette, very deep, very smoky, sultry, very 2016 appropriate, but just not for me at the moment. But the quality is still very good, and I just want to use it. This is an OG in my collections. I'm not sure if anyone has loved it as much as I do, but I adore the matte formulation from Tarte. I say it, and I'll say it over and over again. I think the mattes in this palette are better than Natasha Denona and Natasha Beverly Hills. I don't have to explain it because in my experience, these are so blendable. They are drier, but very pigmented and very, I don't know, adhesive. Like it's sticking to my eyelid, doesn't have any fallout. Beautiful. Gorgeous. But once again, it's very similar to the color story of the Urban Decay palette. These are so deep. It's like, right now when I look at this palette, I want to use 4 shades, and it's not enough for me to reach for a palette so that I can only use 1 out of 4 shades. I'd rather reach for a quad so that I can feel like, oh, I'm using the quad, but not, oh, I just want to use some more. But like these 2 lighter shades, maybe this shade and maybe this purple shade would be something that I can use right now and feel like, oh, this is a look that I want to do at the moment. But back in the day, I was so into warm glam look, so I used a bunch of matte shades in here, and then these metallic, like molten golden shades are so good. But I think it's just preference. Like my preference has changed a lot, and I don't see the value in this palette as I used to do. But I don't know, it's just so hard for me to think of this palette and feels like the matte is still my favorite. But there's a line between the formulation is good versus the formulations and the color are inspirational to me. So you can, to me, like I enjoy the experience of the color more than the experience of the formulations. I don't care if it's hard to work with, I can take time. If I already sit down to do my makeup, I can take time, so I don't need an easily blendable kind of formulations. I mean, like I still care if it's bad, it's bad, but I don't care as much as the color selections that I would want to wear every day. So I'm sorry. I just want to say sorry to this palette. I still love it, but it's not in my top 5 anymore. Sorry. The next one is the Nomad Berlin Underground. Nomad is the indie brand right now. A lot of people love this brand because I've heard that the formulations and the color story are really up in the game right now. But I have this palette. This is like an older palette. I think they're discontinued already, but I still have it. And the color story, come on. I think I love this palette for the uniqueness of the color story, but it's also because of the uniqueness, I don't reach for it very often. But I really try to use it as often as I can, and that's how much I can love it to the extent that I can reach for it. So I want to use more. I want to use it more often. Yes, of course. But I feel okay if I reach for this palette and I only want to use maybe 3 shimmer shades in this palette. Maybe this gunmetal. This is a cool shade. This is like a green, blue, gray, brown shade. It's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous metallic shade. This is kind of a duochrome, so it has a brown and yellow flip. This is also a beautiful shade too, and this one. So I'm interested to the neutral shades in this palette. Kind of a one and done eyeshadow. So I couldn't think of this palette as a whole very often because there's a green and there's a bunch of yellows, and there's only three mattes in this palette. So the brown, the black, and the green shade. Even so, the green and the black, they have the kind of shimmering effect in the paint, and it's not that obvious on the eyelid, but somehow it's still like a pure matte that I think of using. It's like a sequin shades. Yeah, so when I reach for this palette, I technically can only reach for the brown and probably this shimmerish red brown shade. So I think there's some limitations of the neutral mattes in this palette as well. But overall, this is an amazing palette, and I hope I have more than 2 eyes sometimes so that I can do more makeup looks. But I don't know, I don't wear makeup every day. Like sometimes I'm busy in the morning and I just want to like rush to the uni. Natasha Denona. This is my dream palette, not the My Dream palette from Natasha Denona. The Love palette from Natasha Denona is my Cloudy's dream palette. This is so bold and colorful, so deep. Every time I try to use this one, I try to find a way to make it more muted. But they are very bright. I used to love bright shades so much, but not anymore. And I think you can tell it in most of these palettes that they share the same reason, they share the same issue-ish, that I love them. The formulation, the shimmering, glittery, glimmering effect, perfect. It just, I cannot tone them down the way that I want to do my makeup at the moment. So I have this shade right here. It's called Heartbeat. This is Intense and this is Soul. So 3 matte shades that I feel like muted enough that I can sheer it out and make it a little bit muted and a bit like desaturated. But other than that, I cannot do the same thing with any other shade, and I feel bad about that because I would love to. Like, I would love this purple to be not this vibrant. I would love to use this red, but that's the story of like 2 years ago. And I don't want to say it in the way that I feel like there's something wrong with me. I do want to use this palette more often, but if I don't, there might be a problem. There might be a reason why I would. It could be because I bought too many palettes and I need to slow down the rate, but that's all in the past. Like, I didn't purchase as many palettes as I did 2 years ago, 3-4 years ago. Yeah, maybe 4 years ago, because that pandemic, and I started to really get into doing my makeup properly and professionally. So I just like, oh, I want to grab a bunch of palettes. I bought this one in 2022 when after I moved to Australia. To be honest, I got it at Sephora Australia, but very quickly after that I changed my style of makeup. I think I used it totally 15 times since I got it, probably less than that, but around that range. This is Going Coconut by Colourpop. You can tell that I am missing one shade because it's shadow and it's such a mess for me to repress it. I believe, I'm pretty certain it's a matte brown shade, and I feel like it's a matte brown shade. I have 4 other matte brown shades in this palette, so I threw it away. As I'm switching to more neutrally, more light, more sheer, everything is like muted, I really want to use brown shades more often, especially the true neutral, leaning a bit cool tone brown shades in this palette, and the beautiful shimmers, like the 3 shimmers, they make everything for this palette. But I guess it's also about the color story, that in a way that I think there's a territory that I can enter and enjoy it, and that is this neutrally brown, coolish brown tones like this. But I didn't cross that line because I'm staying here in my mauve rosy tones, so I keep going back and forth between, oh, maybe I could move a little bit forward, I could try something like this, I want to use something like this more often, because somehow it's very beautiful, and it's absolutely beautiful on a lot of people, and I want to get on that experience. But I guess I'm a bit rigid right now in terms of there's one color story that I want to go for, so it's a pity that I couldn't get to love this palette more often, but I know the reason why, so doesn't make it less bad, it just makes it more reasonable. I got Do Not Disturb palette from BH Cosmetic. I'm not sure if BH is still a brand anymore. Every single shimmer shade in this palette is beyond gorgeous. But it's a blue palette. It's so blue heavy. So every time I opened this palette, I was overwhelmed by the blueness of this palette. Technically, I can use this shade. This is like a duochrome. It has a blue to purple to a bit gray black shift. So I think this is the most beautiful shade in this palette, and it's a blue shade. But I have two blue mattes, and I feel like it's throwing me off a little bit that these are so blue. I know a lot of people love blue eyeshadow, just not me. Somehow I couldn't even get myself above the idea that, oh, there's some blues in this palette, but there's still some purple. Like, use some purples. No, like, it's throwing me off every time I want to use this palette. It's like, oh, the blue, like, it's irritating. Like, I'm irritated by myself too, because the quality is so nice and everything else is so beautiful. I can make a bunch of beautiful purple looks out of this, but I couldn't. I'm fine. I'm still fine. Let's move on to the last one. This is the most recent one in my collections, kind of. This is a bunch of singles from Clionadh. I got some Clionadh stained glass multi-chromes. This is insane. Like, I couldn't believe that I have some of these. I got this palette earlier this year, probably like around that time, and I think those are so interesting, and once again I can still appreciate something that's cool and interesting knowing that I will never be this cool again, or at least for a while. But I adore these are so... I just want to show you guys a ship of some of these shades. There are shade names in the back, but it's yeah, I don't really want to pick them up and just to tell you guys the name because they are quite fragile. I remember every time that I try to pick them up, I dig my nail into the paint once or twice. So probably wouldn't want to do that today, but I think I picked some of the best shades to me already within the stained glass collections, and I feel very happy that I picked these. They are just beautiful. They are so nice. But I guess my most used shade out of this selection is this one. It's like a standard duochrome. It has a gray to lilac to pink shift, and it's my favorite because it's very muted neutral. Like the whole description of the color story that I refer right now, this is one example. So I guess I should not feel guilty because I'm not this cool anymore. I cannot do this kind of look very often, but I can still appreciate that I have some of these shades in my collections. I overall, I do wish that I can use all of them more often. This palette, this is not everything. This is my selections at the moment right now of eyeshadow palettes in my collection that I wish I could use more. And I believe there are maybe 5 more eyeshadows that could be in this video. But I need to use my eyeshadow palettes. That's my takeaway from this video. I cannot just telling myself that, oh, I want to do my makeup more often, but I want more makeup, I want to buy more, I want new things. No, you already have a bunch of palettes that couldn't use it up. Just focus on them, just show them some appreciations. That's the way to go. Once again, I'm Cloudy, and hopefully we see each other again. Bye!